All right, listeners, strap in. We're about to take a deep dive into Fight Club. You guys sent in a ton of stuff on this one.
A ton.
Yeah, and, well, we're going to break the first rule and talk about it big time. I mean, this movie...
It's iconic.
It is. Beyond the super famous lines and the brutal, those fight scenes, what makes Fight Club so fascinating, even controversial, more than 20 years later? What's your take on that?
It's definitely, like you said, way more than just guys punching each other. This article we're looking at, it argues that Fight Club is almost like a dark comedy reflecting our anxieties about modern life. It even taps into something primal. And even decades later, people are still trying to figure out what it all means.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. The article spends a lot of time on Edward Norton's character, the narrator, and his, just general discontent with his life. He's got insomnia.
Right.
He's surrounded by, all this IKEA furniture he probably hates.
Yeah.
He's even going to these support groups for diseases he doesn't even have, just to, feel something real.
Feel something.
Does that sound familiar to you at all?
Right. And the article points out, the irony of his job.
Oh, yeah.
He's a recall specialist for a car company.
A recall specialist.
It's almost as if he's looking for a recall on his own life, that feeling of emptiness.
Yeah.
Of just going through the motions. It's something a lot of people can relate to, even if they're not, joining underground fight clubs.
Exactly. And then you've got Tyler Durden.
Oh, yeah. Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt.
The epitome of cool.
He's charismatic, rebellious.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, he's a soap salesman by day. But, at night, he's blowing things up and rejecting everything about consumerism. Have you ever felt that kind of push and pull? You're supposed to want certain things, but they just feel empty.
Absolutely. And the film really plays with that tension. The article describes Tyler as, the narrator's shadow self.
His shadow self.
For anyone unfamiliar with that term, it basically refers to the parts of ourselves we hide.
Yeah.
The urges and desires we're told are unacceptable.
Right.
Tyler embodies everything the narrator isn't allowed to be. And that soak he makes.
Yeah, that's so.
The article suggests it's symbolic, he's trying to cleanse society of its obsession with material things.
Wow. So you've got this insomnia-ridden narrator searching for meaning.
Right.
And then you have this rebellious soap maker who's all about rejecting the system. How does the article explain their connection and, the whole birth of Fight Club?
Well, they're both yearning for something authentic, something beyond that, consumerist culture they're trapped in. And the article argues that the violence of Fight Club, as crazy as it seems, it's their way of trying to connect with something real, something visceral.
Right.
It's their escape from the numbness of their everyday lives.
It starts with just a few guys fighting in a basement, right?
Yeah.
A way to release frustration and feel something.
Feel something real.
But it quickly escalates into this full-blown anti-establishment movement.
Project Mayhem.
Project Mayhem. I mean, they're vandalizing corporate buildings, disrupting the financial system. They even resort to acts of terrorism. Where do you think the film is going with all of this?
That's a good question, and it's where the film's critique of masculinity and violence gets really interesting.
Okay.
On one hand, these guys are finding, a sense of brotherhood, even purpose in their destructive activities.
Yeah.
But it also shows the dangers of unchecked aggression, how it can spiral out of control. It's not presenting violence as, a solution,
Right.
but rather as a symptom of a deeper societal illness.
And the film doesn't shy away from showing the consequences either, right?
Not at all.
The house they almost burned down, the credit card bombs.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, if we were to truly embrace that inner rebellion, where would it lead us?
Yeah.
Would we all end up like Tyler Durden?
Right. And that's the big question the film seems to be asking. And this is where it gets even more complicated because, are you ready for this?
Yeah.
The big twist is that Tyler Durden isn't real.
Wait, what?
He's a figment of the narrator's imagination.
Whoa, hold on. So if Tyler's not real, does that mean Fight Club itself wasn't real?
It makes you question everything you've seen up to that point.
Yeah. What do you think the article is getting at here? This changes everything, right?
It does. It takes Fight Club from, a cool action film to a psychological thriller exploring, the dark side of the human psyche. We'll have to dive into the implications of that twist more deeply later, but it raises a lot of questions, what does it mean that the narrator created this whole persona to act out his rage?
It's mind-blowing for sure. But before we get too deep into that twist, there's another important character we need to talk about. Marla Singer.
Helena Bonham Carter.
Played by Helena Bonham Carter. She adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
Absolutely, she's a fascinating character. What's your take on her role in all of this?
Well, the article describes her as like a catalyst for the narrator's transformation.
Mm,
Like she represents his attraction to chaos.
okay.
She sees through Tyler's facade, even if the narrator doesn't at first.
Right.
And that scene where they're watching buildings explode
Oh, yeah.
with Marla saying, "You met me at a very strange time in my life," gives me chills every time.
It's almost as if the collapsing buildings mirror the narrator's internal world falling apart. But speaking of the wider world,
Yeah.
the film had a huge cultural impact too, didn't it? It seems like everyone knows at least one line from Fight Club.
Right. And the article dives into all of that,
Yeah.
from its controversial reception to how its quotes and imagery have become like part of our collective consciousness. We've covered a lot of ground so far, but there's still so much to unpack. Are you ready to keep going?
Absolutely. We've only just scratched the surface. So we talked about how the movie plays with this idea of rebellion and how it dives into the darker side of masculinity. But what strikes me is how Fight Club walks this tightrope between criticism and, well, almost glorifying those themes. Do you think the article addresses that at all?
Yeah, it does. It mentions how the film was super controversial when it came out, with some critics accusing it of actually encouraging violence and anarchy. What do you think about that? Do you think there's any truth to those accusations, or are they missing the point?
I think it's a valid concern. The film definitely pushes boundaries, and it doesn't shy away from like the brutal realities of fighting and destruction.
Yeah.
But the article makes a good point. It's like saying The Godfather glorifies the mafia. You know, it's about exploring those themes, not necessarily endorsing them.
Right. It's not a how-to manual for starting a revolution.
Right.
But it does make you think about like those urges we all have, that desire to, rebel against the things we don't agree with.
Exactly. Fight Club uses violence as a way to get at those deeper issues, the frustrations with consumerism, the search for identity in a world that feels increasingly artificial.
Yeah.
It's not saying violence is the answer, but it's showing us how those feelings can manifest in extreme ways.
And it's not like the film ends with everyone living happily ever after in some anarchist utopia. Right?
Yeah.
It shows the destructive consequences pretty clearly.
Yeah.
Just look at what happens to the narrator and the members of Project Mayhem.
Exactly. It's more of a cautionary tale, a way of exploring the dark side of human nature.
Yeah.
The article argues that the film is ultimately about self-discovery.
Self-discovery.
It's about confronting your inner demons and finding a way to integrate them in a healthy way, not letting them take over completely.
And that brings us back to that mind-blowing twist, the whole Tyler Durden being a figment of the narrator's imagination thing.
Right.
I mean, it makes you question everything you've seen up to that point, doesn't it?
It definitely does. It's such a brilliant way to force the audience to look inward,
Yeah.
to question their own perceptions of reality and identity.
Think about it this way. If you take Tyler Durden at face value as a real person,
Right.
the movie seems pretty insane.
Mm.
But if you see him as a metaphor for the narrator's suppressed desires and rage, it becomes this incredibly deep and layered story about the human psyche.
Yeah.
What's fascinating to me is that this is a story that continues to resonate decades later. Do you think that's something the article touches on? Why do you think that is?
And the article talks about that, actually, and I think it suggests that those anxieties and frustrations the film explores, that feeling of being trapped by consumerism, the search for meaning in a world that feels increasingly meaningless, are even more prevalent today than they were back in the 90s.
Right. We're bombarded with messages about what we should buy, how we should look, what success is supposed to be.
All the time.
It's easy to feel lost in all of that, to feel like we're just going through the motions. Do you ever feel that way?
Absolutely. And the article argues that Fight Club offers a kind of catharsis for those feelings. It allows us to experience that rebellion and chaos vicariously, even if we're not actually going to start our own underground fight club.
Well, because we can't all go around blowing up credit card companies.
Right.
But we can watch a movie about it and feel a little less trapped in our own routines.
Right. It's a safe space to explore those darker impulses, to question the status quo, to imagine a world where we break free from the rules that bind us. But it's also a reminder that those impulses can be dangerous if they're not channeled in a healthy way.
Yeah. The article also mentions how iconic the movie's quotes and imagery have become.
Oh, yeah.
How they've seeped into our culture. The first rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club I mean, everyone knows that line, even if they've never seen the movie.
It's ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
The film tells you not to talk about it, but then it gives you these incredibly quotable lines that practically beg to be repeated and shared.
It's almost like that's part of its appeal. That feeling of being in on a secret, of understanding something that others don't.
Yeah.
But beyond the catchy lines and the shocking violence, there's a lot more going on beneath the surface. The film uses humor in a really interesting way, don't you think? It's not just dark and intense all the time. There are these moments of absurdity that really catch you off guard.
Yes. It's like the film uses humor to create this sense of unease, to undercut the seriousness of the themes it's exploring.
Like that scene where Tyler is talking about how he got the recipe for his soap from liposuction fat.
Oh, yeah.
Stolen from a rich woman. So twisted, but you can't help but laugh, right? Or the part where they're vandalizing a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And Tyler tells the barista, I want you to hit me as hard as you can. It's a moment of pure absurdity that somehow perfectly encapsulates the film's anarchic spirit.
Exactly. And then there's that line where the narrator is describing his support group experiences. And he says, if I saw a bird, I'd want to know what kind of bird it was, but I didn't care about birds. It's such a simple line, but it perfectly captures the emptiness and detachment that he's feeling.
These moments of dark humor are what make Fight Club so unique and memorable. They prevent it from being too preachy or heavy-handed. We've covered a lot so far. The plot, the characters, the themes, the controversy, the cultural impact, even the dark humor. Is there anything else we need to cover before we wrap things up?
Well, we've talked about the movie's message and how it resonates with audiences, but we haven't really addressed what the film is asking of us, the viewers. What do we do with all of this?
That's a great point. It's one thing to analyze the film, but it's another to figure out what it means for us in our own lives.
Yeah.
Ready to tackle that?
Okay, so we've explored this whole movie, Fight Club. We've talked about the violence, the philosophy, the dark humor.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's not just a movie to watch and forget about.
Not at all. This article we've been diving into,
Right.
it really pushes the idea that Fight Club is like throwing down a challenge to us, to the audience. What do you think that challenge is?
It's like the movie is holding up a mirror to us. Like it's asking us, what are we suppressing to fit into society's mold? You know, what parts of ourselves are we denying?
Yeah.
It's not about, literally fist fighting, but that inner struggle we all have.
The article even quotes Tyler Durden, right? You're not your job.
Yeah.
You're not how much money you have in the bank.
Right. Powerful stuff.
It's like a direct call to define ourselves by something more than just the stuff we buy.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's not about becoming like some violent anarchist, like Tyler Durden. It's about recognizing that inner rebellion,
Yeah.
that yearning for authenticity,
Yeah.
and finding a healthy way to channel it.
So instead of blowing up credit card companies, maybe we should, I don't know, take up pottery.
Like Tyler does after he vanishes.
Yeah. Like, is that the big takeaway here? Should we all become soap-making, pottery-throwing hermits?
Well, maybe not for everyone, but it's about finding your own form of creative expression, pushing back against what feels inauthentic in your life. Maybe it's art. Maybe it's connecting with nature. Maybe it's just saying no to the things you don't actually want, what resonates with you.
It all comes back to self-awareness, doesn't it?
It really does.
Recognizing those, those Tyler Durden impulses that we all have,
Right.
but not letting them completely take over. Like the narrator learns, it's about finding that balance.
Yeah, the movie doesn't give easy answers, and this article really emphasizes that.
Yeah.
Fight Club is more about provoking those tough questions. It's a lifelong process, this journey of figuring ourselves out.
It is. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about with this deep dive into Fight Club.
I think so.
From bloody basements to philosophical dilemmas, this movie really packs a punch.
It does.
Any final thoughts for our listeners before we let them go and ponder their own inner Tyler Durdens?
Just this. The world is full of, those single-serving friends, as Marla puts it. But finding real connection, real meaning, it comes from embracing our own complexities, even the messy parts. It's a challenge, but it's also where the real growth happens.
Beautifully said. And hey, if you're ever feeling lost or stuck in a rut, remember, you're not alone. You can always hit up this podcast for another deep dive.
That's right.
We might not have all the answers, but we'll ask the right questions together. And on that note, I think it's time for us to evolve.
Evolve.
See you on the other side, listeners.